Here is a powerful introduction based on the text provided, designed to grab attention immediately and drive engagement. Deep in the frozen forests of Russia's Far East, over 4,000 miles away from the fighting in Ukraine, the night sky was suddenly torn apart by a massive fireball. In a blink, the Trans-Siberian Railway, the single most critical artery feeding Moscow's war machine, screeched to a grinding, twisted halt. But here is the terrifying reality for the Kremlin. This wasn't a lucky missile strike. It wasn't a long-range drone. It was a calculated act of sabotage. Ukrainian intelligence operatives are now working deep inside Russia's own backyard, physically planting explosives to sever the lifeline connecting Vladimir Putin to North Korean ammunition. The illusion of safety is gone. From burning relay cabinets in the south to derailed trains in the remote east, the message is unmistakable. There is nowhere left for Russia to hide its logistics. Is this the masterstroke that finally breaks Russia's ability to wage war? Or will Moscow find a way to bypass the destruction? If you believe this sabotage campaign is the game changer Ukraine has been waiting for, comment 1 right now. Let's dive into how Ukraine is dismantling the enemy from the inside out. The silence of the Russian Far East is usually absolute, a frozen void where the only sound is the rhythmic, endless clatter of steel on steel. But near Sosnovka, deep in the Khabarovsk Krai region, that silence was violently shattered, not by the wind or the cold, but by a calculated act of destruction that turned the night sky into a blinding inferno. A freight train on the Trans-Siberian Railway, the very spine of Russia's logistical body, was rolling through the dense forests when a sudden blast ripped through the tracks with catastrophic force, sending heavy train cars toppling off the line, twisting metal like paper, and scattering cargo across the snow in a chaotic graveyard of industry. For a terrifying moment, one of the most important railway arteries in the world simply stopped beating. This was not a missile fired from the distant front lines of Ukraine, nor was it the work of a long-range drone humming through the radar gaps. It was something much closer, something far more sinister and operationally damaging for Moscow. It was the work of a sabotage team operating with surgical precision deep inside Russia's own territory, proving that the safety of distance is now nothing more than an illusion. To understand the gravity of a train derailing thousands of kilometers away from the active war zone, we must look beyond the twisted wreckage and see the pattern emerging from the shadows. This explosion near Sosnovka was not a random accident or an isolated stroke of bad luck for the Kremlin. It was the latest and most brazen move in a meticulously built campaign that has been targeting Russia's railways, supply hubs, and logistical lifelines for weeks. The architects of this chaos are not relying on brute force alone, but on the terrified realization that their enemy is already among them. The pattern began long before the November 14th blast, with early warning signs flashing red as far back as October 21st, when an explosion hit a key railway link in Russia's Leningrad region. There, a freight train reportedly carrying military cargo burst into flames, leaving tracks mangled and rail services paralyzed, while Russian officials desperately tried to dismiss the incident as a mere technical disruption. But those who were paying attention saw it for what it was: a clear, undeniable signal that Ukrainian sabotage teams were no longer bound by the front lines, but were operating with impunity deep within Russian-controlled territory. In the tense weeks that followed, this shadow war escalated with ruthless efficiency as sabotage groups began targeting locomotives, fuel depots, and rail control systems across the vast expanse of the Federation and its occupied territories. These attacks, mostly occurring far away from the thunder of artillery, inflicted delays, uncertainty, and unexpected costs on Russia's war machine, setting the stage for the humiliation that occurred in the Far East. When United 24 media reported the explosion near Sosnovka, the geography alone was staggering. This region lies over 4,000 miles away from Ukraine, a distance so vast it should have been a sanctuary, yet it became a target. A day later, Ukraine's main directorate of intelligence, known as HUA, stripped away any remaining mystery by explaining exactly what had happened, stating with cold confidence that the explosion had blocked a key railway artery used to supply weapons and ammunition, specifically those obtained from North Korea. Their statement cut straight to the heart of Russia's embarrassment, mocking the Kremlin's special services for their inability to ensure effective control over even the most critical infrastructure facilities. Ukraine did not just claim responsibility, they proved it with a video that served as a psychological weapon, showing operatives moving quietly along the tracks, documenting the terrain, and placing charges on the rails with the calm demeanor of professionals at work. The message was unmistakable and chilling. Ukraine has operatives on the ground, they know where to strike, and the immense size of Russia is no longer a defense but a vulnerability. This campaign of dismantling the enemy's logistical capabilities is relentless. For just 2 days later, the pro-Ukrainian partisan group HALTED struck again, this time in the Melitopol district of occupied Zaporizhzhia, setting fire to a relay cabinet used to control a railway line. A simple burned cabinet can halt trains just as effectively as a bomb, and in this case, it stopped several military trains destined for the southern front. In the span of just 48 hours, Ukrainian intelligence officers and partisan groups struck 2 different railways separated by thousands of kilometers, one in the remote Russian Far East, the other in occupied southern Ukraine. Yet both attacks served the singular, devastating purpose of slowing, interrupting, and complicating the logistics that keep the Russian army alive. The strategic genius lies in the coordination. By hitting the arteries that feed the war effort from both ends, Ukraine is forcing Russia to bleed resources, divert security personnel, and look over its shoulder constantly, knowing that the next strike could come from anywhere, at any time. To grasp the full magnitude of this strike, one must stare into the sheer scale of the target itself, for the Trans-Siberian Railway is not merely a collection of tracks and sleepers, but the very circulatory system of the Russian Federation. Stretching an incomprehensible 9,188 kilometers, or 5,771 miles, it stands as the single largest railway route on the face of the earth, a colossal band of steel that binds the frozen resource-rich wilderness of the Far East to the centers of power in Europe. Without this singular, vulnerable line, the massive logistical body of Russia begins to fail, its extremities cut off from the heart, causing a collapse in capacity that no amount of propaganda can hide. For decades, this route was the pride of the state, capable of hauling 120 million tons of freight annually, metals, oil, chemicals, and minerals that fueled the economy. But as the war has dragged on, the cargo has darkened, shifting from the materials of industry to the instruments of death. Vladimir Putin himself understood the existential importance of this artery, opening the National Welfare Fund to pour billions of dollars into modernizing the line, describing it as the crucial bridge between Europe and the Asia-Pacific. Yet despite plans to raise capacity to over 200 million tons, the railway remains a fragile thread upon which the entire war effort now hangs. It is the backbone of Russia's long-distance logistics, and Ukraine has realized that if you cannot break the enemy at the front, you must break his spine at home. The strategic logic behind targeting this specific railway becomes terrifyingly clear when one inspects the manifest of the trains rolling out of the Far East. For the Trans-Siberian is no longer just moving coal and timber. It is the primary conduit for a desperate empire outsourcing its ammunition production to a pariah state. The reason Ukrainian intelligence emphasized the transport of weapons from the Democratic People's Republic of Korea is that Pyongyang has quietly become one of Moscow's most vital lifelines in this grinding conflict. By April 2025, the lethal consequences of this trade were already visible in the ruins of Kyiv, where a ballistic missile manufactured in North Korea claimed the lives of 12 civilians, a brutal testament to the fact that the war is being fueled by factories thousands of miles away. The Guardian and open-source trackers have documented a staggering volume of movement, identifying 64 separate shipments over 20 months that amounted to nearly 16,000 containers. A river of steel and explosives believed to be carrying millions of artillery shells destined to pulverize Ukrainian cities. This is not a trickle of aid. It is a flood, with Ukrainian estimates suggesting that North Korea now supplies a significant share of all artillery shells fired by Russian batteries, revealing a humiliating dependency where entire Russian units would fall silent without the patronage of Kim Jong-un. However, This reliance on Pyongyang exposes a deep, rotting weakness at the core of the Russian war machine, for the quantity of the shells barely masks the catastrophic lack of quality. The relationship is defined by a substantial value gap and a desperation that forces Moscow to accept scraps from the Soviet era. Intelligence reports indicate that North Korea is emptying its warehouses of millions of shells, but nearly half of them are faulty, corroded, or dangerously unpredictable. This is the reality of Russia's logistical nightmare, spending precious time and resources hauling thousands of tons of ammunition across the world's longest railway, only to find that 50% of the cargo is practically useless. Russian soldiers are forced to expend additional manpower refurbishing these decayed rounds before they can even be loaded, turning what should be a supply advantage into a logistical burden. The economic imbalance is equally stark, with Russia receiving nearly $10 billion worth of arms while paying out only a fraction of that, a disparity that suggests the supply is finite, and that as the stockpiles in North Korea dwindle, the cost of every single usable shell will skyrocket. This looming scarcity has driven Moscow into a frantic attempt to diversify its routes, proving just how effective the rail sabotage has been in choking their operations. The construction of a new road bridge over the Tumen River, intended to bypass rail vulnerabilities and handle hundreds of cargo vehicles a day, is not a sign of strength, but a symptom of panic. It is an admission that the Trans-Siberian Railway is no longer secure, that the partisan attacks and special operation strikes are bleeding their logistics dry, and that they must desperately claw out new paths to keep the ammunition flowing. But a road can never match the capacity of a rail line, and every train derailed near Sosnovka or delayed in the interior creates a ripple effect that freezes operations on the front line. Ukraine is not merely destroying targets, they are increasing the friction of war, making every mile of transport slower, riskier, and more expensive for the Kremlin. The promise from Ukrainian intelligence that the work to dismantle the enemy's capabilities continues is a grim forecast for Moscow, posing the ultimate question of endurance. How long can the Russian war machine keep grinding forward when its arteries are being severed one by one, and its primary source of ammunition is becoming slower, costlier, and undeniably broken? The construction of the new bridge over the Tumen River is not a symbol of expansion, but the physical manifestation of Moscow's anxiety, a frantic attempt to pour concrete over a strategic wound that refuses to heal. By pivoting to overland trucks to bypass the vulnerabilities of the rail network, Russia is implicitly admitting that its prized Trans-Siberian line, the iron veins of the empire, is no longer a guaranteed sanctuary for the tools of war. But replacing a freight train with a convoy of trucks is an act of regression, not progress. It is a logistical downgrade forced upon a superpower by the relentless pressure of sabotage. This desperate shifting of routes exposes the terrifying reality that Russia is running out of safe options to feed its insatiable front lines. The economic arithmetic behind this struggle is equally damning, painting a picture of a war effort that is consuming resources far faster than it can replenish them. Russia has received nearly $10 billion worth of hardware from the North, yet has paid only a fraction of that cost, a disparity that suggests a looming debt that will likely be paid in geopolitical subservience rather than cash. As the stockpiles of usable Soviet-era shells in North Korea begin to run dry, leaving only the dregs of manufacturing defects and corroded casings, the value of every single shipment that successfully crosses the border becomes incalculable. In this context, every delay is a crisis. Every derailment is a catastrophe that reverberates from the forests of Khabarovsk to the trenches of the Donbass. And this is precisely why the explosions near Sosnovka and the fires in Melitopol are so devastating. They are not merely tactical nuisances, they are strategic strangulation. Every time a charge detonates on a rail line, it does more than twist metal. It forces the entire Russian command structure to pause, to reroute, and to burn precious time they do not have. The psychological impact permeates the entire supply chain, creating a pervasive sense of dread among the operators who know that a saboteur could be watching from the tree line at any mile marker along the thousands of miles of track. It turns the vastness of the Russian landscape, once its greatest defense, into its greatest liability, offering infinite hiding spots for those intent on breaking the machine. Ukraine's intelligence services have made a promise that chills the blood of every logistical officer in the Kremlin. The work to dismantle the enemy's capabilities is not finishing, it is continuing. There is no pause button. The sabotage is a rolling thunder that follows the tracks, haunting the occupier in their own home. The ultimate question that now hangs over the Kremlin is not whether they can repair a rail line, but whether they can sustain a war of attrition when their most vital supply line is slow, their ammunition is unreliable, and their enemy is waiting in the shadows with a detonator in hand. The fires burning in the Russian Far East are a signal that the war has no boundaries. And for Moscow, the long, cold winter of isolation is only just beginning. The illusion of invulnerability that once shrouded the Russian interior has been irrevocably pierced, replaced by a gnawing paranoia that stretches from the gilded halls of the Kremlin to the frozen rail yards of the Far East. What we are witnessing is the systematic atrophy of a superpower's ability to project force, a slow-motion paralysis induced not by a frontal assault, but by 1,000 cuts inflicted on the hidden nerves of the state. The explosion in Khabarovsk is a testament to a new kind of warfare where there are no safe havens, no rear guard, and no distance great enough to offer sanctuary from the consequences of invasion. Russia is finding that its reliance on the Trans-Siberian Railway is a double-edged sword. The very link that allows it to draw breath from its authoritarian allies in Asia is also a singular point of failure, a fragile throat that can be squeezed tight by a handful of operatives in the dark. As the trains carry their cargoes of rusting, defective North Korean shells across the continent, they move not as heralds of victory, but as desperate convoys trying to outrun their own inevitable disruption. The logistical equation has shifted permanently against Moscow, for while they must defend nearly 6,000 miles of steel, the saboteur needs only to succeed at one single point to unleash chaos. This asymmetry is the defining feature of the current phase of the conflict, turning the immense scale of the Russian Federation into a logistical prison where every mile traveled increases the probability of disaster. The burning relay cabinets in Zaporizhzhia and the twisted rails in the Far East are distinct notes in the same symphony of destruction, a coordinated effort to starve the artillery batteries that are the only thing keeping the Russian army in the fight. When the Deputy Chief of Ukrainian Defense Intelligence speaks of dismantling the enemy's capabilities, it is not a boast, but a methodical operational plan that is being executed with ruthless efficiency. The strategic calculus has fundamentally changed. Every ruble spent repairing a bridge or guarding a desolate stretch of track is a ruble not spent on the front, and every hour a train sits idle is an hour where Ukrainian positions remain unshelled. The reliance on North Korean ammunition, already fraught with the perils of high failure rates and economic imbalance, is now compounded by the terror of transport. It is a humiliation for a nation that once prided itself on industrial might to be reduced to smuggling defective foreign weapons through its own burning backyard. The war is no longer defined solely by the mud of the trenches, but by the silence of the supply lines, by the trains that never arrive, and by the shells that never fire. As the winter deepens and the cracks in the supply chain widen into chasms, the question is not how Russia will retaliate, but how long a war machine can function when its blood supply is being drained drop by drop, mile by mile, by an enemy who has mastered the art of striking the heart from the shadows. The track is broken, the signal is dead, and for the Russian war effort, the line is reaching its end. Ultimately, the fire that consumed the freight cars near Sosnovka is not merely an incident report to be filed and forgotten. It is a prophetic vision of Russia's future in this war, a future where the concept of a safe rearguard has been permanently extinguished. The strategic paralysis creeping into Moscow's logistics is the direct result of a hubris that believed a war could be fought on foreign soil while the homeland remained untouched. A delusion that has now been shattered by the roar of explosives in the deep taiga. The Kremlin finds itself trapped in a nightmare of its own making, tethered to a failing supply line that stretches across thousands of miles of indefensible wilderness, dependent on the erratic charity of a pariah state whose ammunition is as unreliable as the rails it travels upon. This is the defining attrition of the modern age, where the might of a superpower is not measured by the number of tanks it parades in Red Square, but by its ability to simply move a crate of shells from point A to point B without it erupting in flames. The disconnect between Putin's geopolitical ambitions and the crumbling reality of his infrastructure has never been more glaring. And with every successful sabotage operation, that gap widens into an unbridgeable chasm. As the winter sets in and the demand for heat and power rises, the strain on Russia's rail network will only intensify, compounding the damage inflicted by Ukrainian operatives who have proven they can strike at will. The chilling promise issued by Ukraine's intelligence services, that the work to dismantle the enemy's capabilities continues, is not a threat of future action, but a statement of ongoing reality. It is a guarantee that there will be no respite, no pause to regroup, and no stretch of track that can be considered secure. The psychological toll of this campaign cannot be overstated. It forces the Russian military leadership to look inward, to doubt their own security apparatus, and to divert massive resources to police an expansive territory that is simply too vast to control. They are fighting a ghost that lives in their own infrastructure, a presence that turns every tunnel, bridge, and switching station into a potential trap. The war has come home, not with the march of invading armies, but with the quiet, devastating efficiency of a well-placed charge in the dead of night. In the end, the derailment in the Far East is a microcosm of the entire Russian invasion. A massive, heavy machine hurtling forward with immense momentum, only to be undone by the systemic rot within its own foundation and the precision of an adversary who knows exactly where to cut. The arteries are bleeding, the supplies are dwindling, and the iron road that was meant to carry the fuel for conquest has become the path of its undoing. Moscow may rebuild the tracks, and they may weld the steel back together, but they cannot repair the shattered confidence of a system that knows it is being hunted from the inside. The explosion at Sosnovka was not just the sound of metal twisting. It was the sound of the clock ticking down on Russia's ability to sustain its war. A countdown that echoes louder with every train that fails to reach the front.